Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming. It is wonderful to see all of you here. My name is Adil Najam. I am a professor here at the Pardee School, and we are here today on behalf of the Pardee Center for the Study of the Longer Range Future, co-sponsored by CURA, which is our Institute for Religion and World Affairs. We have the director of CURA here with us, Jeremy Menchik. Thank you, Jeremy, very much. We heard from the director of Pardee Center earlier today. As I said, it's wonderful to see all of you here. We are all brimming with ideas. I happen to know that because what you see in front of you is a few of the participants of a roundtable that has been happening here in this building all morning. And we have had some very intense, very interesting discussions on this question of faith and climate change. Right? And I highlight the word question there because in some ways we are trying to seek in this roundtable the questions that we might want to ask and explore on this link between faith and climate change. As opposed to the answers of them, which will only come after the question. I should say that this is the second, what we are in part of today and tomorrow is the second roundtable in a series of roundtables that have been, that are part of my own fellowships as a faculty fellow at the Pardee Center for the Study of the Longer Range Future, and they are being done in collaboration with our colleagues in Oxford. My colleague, Dr. Shahid Jamil, is sitting right there, who's coming to join us from Oxford, and the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies, sorry, OCIS, the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies. And the idea of this is that we have studied faith and ecology for many years, and in fact, you will hear from some of the people who have been pioneers of that study. But at this point, in where we are, particularly on the climate crisis, we come to this roundtable with the question, so what can one do with these ideas? So we have much better understanding than we might once have had of the type of links there are. There are still many, many questions. But how, why, and whether they can influence the behavior of those who profess to believe is a policy question as a climate person to me. That can faith be an instrument of behavior change in those who profess to believe in whatever faith? Our particular focus has particularly been on Islam, but our workshop and our roundtable includes people from multiple dimensions, people who come from the world of science, people who come from the world of theology, people who do comparative religion, people who study Islam and ecology, people who study the Bible and religion, and so on and so forth. So I just wanted to give a little bit of that and not too much. Our job here, or our goal here for this afternoon, is not as much to tell you what we have discussed, but to continue some of that conversation in public with three of our participants, and others are sitting in the room, and I will encourage them and even call upon them to jump into this conversation, to bring some of that conversation to you, but also in the hope that you will add to that conversation with your comments and thoughts, so that whatever we continue to discuss later today and tomorrow is enriched by those bigger ideas. I will not go into very long introductions. You have seen them in the notice that brought you here, but I have with me Mary Evelyn Tucker, who joins us from Yale University. She is many things, including she is the reason why many of us have been working on these issues for many of these years. And that is true not just in my case, but in many other cases I know. So one of the pioneers of what we now call the field of religion and ecology in particular, both herself and John Grimm, who's also sitting here in the audience. We have Professor Ibrahim, who joins us from Clark University, but via Clark University, but from Turkey. has had a long and very distinguished career, particularly in the study of Islam and ecology in its many dimensions. And I will only mention the most recent, including some of the earliest studies, but also the more recent work on something called Al-Mizan, which some of you might know, which is a document produced by the United Nations on Islam and environment as a major statement of faith belief, kind of not a response to, but certainly inspired by the Pope's encyclical in the sense of looking at the question. And I am delighted to have with us Dr. Afreen Siddiqi, who joins us from across that little river from MIT, who is, as I mentioned this morning, an actual rocket scientist. I just love saying that. But she actually is. She actually is. Who brings this understanding of the deepest of natural sciences, but also in the context of socio-ecological development and how that fits in. And I think they represent a lot of what we have in the room, people who come from these different directions. So I have said too much, but let me stop there. We are going to have a conversation and jump in, or I will ask you to jump in at any point. We really do want to have a conversation. And I really have one opening question for all three of you. Take it wherever you want. I'll start with you, Mary Evelyn, if that is okay. Which is, what has brought you here?
Well, first of all, you and your quite extraordinary work and broad thinking, and as head of World Wildlife Fund, it's really amazing what you're doing. So I thank you, because as a person who's an international relations person, policy person, you have expanded all of our views, held that umbrella up really largely. But, you know, I've prepared, of course, an hour talk, and you're going to be very entertained by it. But I think I would like to speak in a very personal way, because I do feel what brought me here. I was just talking to a graduate student working on immigration and refugee work, and what brings me here is my heart is breaking, isn't yours? And I think the fact that we can hardly contain this heartbreak is what brings us here. And also the fact that we don't really know what to do. That is really mind-boggling for supposedly Homo sapiens. But we haven't earned our last name yet. We are not wisdom creatures. It's not that I feel it's impossible that we will get there, but it is going to take a long time, which is why I so appreciate the mixture that's here. But let me put this into a perspective of working on this with John for over 30 years and with an incredible teacher, Thomas Berry, who was saying 50 years ago, the environment will be the leading problem that we will all be facing. So we've been hearing this sad, bad news for a long time. We know we have to develop a certain resiliency even to look at the news, much less absorb it. But what I want to say is, having been in secular academia, did my degree at Columbia, and we worked at Harvard on these conference series for 3 years in the mid-90s. We were out at Berkeley making this film on Journey of the Universe, Deep Time.
Sorry, but you do please tell them about the conference series and the books
Yes.
that came out of it, because they really are the defining thing in what we now call a field,
Great.
or a defining thing.
Okay, thank you. So I have my show and tell you. We'll pass this around. So we, in the mid-90s, said, we're not scientists, we're not policy people, we're not economists. What can we give? We are historians of religion. And we felt at that time, like now, that a moral force and an academic field would be important. To navigate this was almost impossible, especially in secular academia. This is why I'm trying to emphasize this point. But we began with conferences on Buddhism and Confucianism. My area is Asian religions, and my husband's is indigenous traditions. And actually a foundation came and said, you have to do this for all the world's religions. And here's the thing. The universe, whatever you want to say, Providence opened up space for the most quite amazing collaborative work of hundreds of people around the planet to help create this new field. So there were 10 conferences and then 10 books that came out from Harvard. And, you know, again, Harvard was a difficult place to work at. It's very, very difficult. And the skepticism was enormous. And I could tell you stories that you'd understand, but raise your eyebrows. So, but here's what has happened because of the work of many, many people. There are now, this was mid-90s, so it's almost 30 years. There are now 22 graduate programs in religion and ecology across North America. That means master's programs, 3 PhD programs, and so on. And our students pointed this out to us last year. So we were like, this is incredible in a relatively short period of time. So this field that Professor Nasr said, you have to create a field of study, but a moral force in the world for action and climate change and so on. And that is also there too. I mean, there were 450 people arrested in New York, you know, this summer about climate change, and many of them were coming from the religious communities. So this field and force has happened. Let me just say that what we were talking about in the room just before here, what are the obstacles to this still? You know, I'll give the other. This was the first conference in 2000 and 2001. We had 2 conferences at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And we had representatives from the world's religions. This is the best article, as we know, of Noman Haq on the Islamic world. But we also had scientists and policy people and George Rupp, president of Columbia. And we took all that work from Harvard, went down to the Natural History Museum and the UN, and we founded a forum on religion and ecology. Bill Moyers, the incredible TV interviewer, he spent all day interviewing people. And we were trying to say, okay, here's the religious community, here's the science, here's the kind of, we had people from the World Bank and so on and so forth. Now, that is, you know, almost 25 years ago. But here's what the obstacle still is that we were talking about. And these were actually my notes. So it's really funny that so science and economics, you take those, you say science is giving us the facts, but scientists and IPCC, until very recently, would make no application or say we must change. This neutrality of science has been so intense. We'll have the facts, we'll have the data, we'll have the models, but you, religious people or whatever, you tell us how to change. That gap and the communication gap of climate science has been disastrous. Charts, graphs don't change people, right? Economics has said we can discount the future. The Nobel Prize person at Yale got a Nobel Prize for that. Discount the future. Yeah. I mean, this is like pushing something off into future generations. I also want to say economics has now, or shall we say business, let's say business. Business is now saying, even Wall Street, climate change will be it is already a complete disaster for any economic system. It is going to absolutely bankrupt us, et cetera. We can also, my brother's head of Chubb Insurance in New York. The insurance industry has known for decades this would absolutely upset our world. And Lloyd's, many of the insurance companies have it on their front page. Is it known? Is it discussed? Well, now because people can't get insurance, it is. So you've got science trying to give the facts. You've got business and some economists saying this is going to be a disaster. You have insurance saying it is a disaster. You have the US military, the DOD, Department of Defense, saying for 40 years, this is the largest national security issue that we are facing. Norfolk, these different naval bases, the water's rising. You can't even get onto the base except for certain days of the week. Is this known? Is this reported in our news? Weather and attribution of climate is not even reported. This is one of the last stands for denial in the world. I work in Asia. Let me give you the contrast. Been going to China since '85. 95, from a poll person, Chinese poll person who was at Yale last year and is a friend back at Beijing University now. 95% of the people in China know climate change is the largest existential risk. They have a program on ecological civilization saying we have overshot industrial civilization. We are now going towards ecological civilization. 30 years they've been working on it. And they are drawing on their own traditions of Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. Is this known? No, we have creation of an enemy mentality. So what I'm saying is we have to realize the problems here in the US. We have to reach out to those who are making changes. But let me conclude on this note. Why I think this effort is so important, because the scientists are apoplectic. They are willing now to be arrested. They are joining Extinction Rebellion and so on, because they've been giving this for so long. They have despair and anxiety. Similar to certain people even in business or economics. But here's the hope. I went to college in Washington, D.C. to be involved in civil rights and the anti-Vietnam War movement. What gave me hope when I saw the beatings on the bridge in Selma? What gave me hope when I saw the vets protesting against the war and we were tear gassed at the Pentagon and so on? What gave me hope was people like Martin Luther King, who graduated from BU right here, because this religious, spiritual sensibility is something, the deepest part of who we are. We can't even describe why this matters. And when that rises up again, when that is something that infuses our body, mind, spirit, we have the possibility of making these changes. So that's the hope. And I really think that we can do it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Ibrahim, climate and faith, what brings you to it?
Yes, thank you for inviting me here. In fact, this question is asked me by my students here too. I have been teaching environmental ethics, ecofeminism, ecology and religion at Clark University for almost 2 years. And I said there are some American ladies. They are my pioneers. In 90s, when I was looking for a topic for my dissertation at İdris Technical University in Ankara, I just came across The Silent Spring of Rachel Carson. Then from that, The Death of Nature by Carolyn Mergent. Then I submitted my topic, but they said, no, I couldn't find a supervisor. They said, this is a tribal problem. With science and technology, we will solve these problems. In 10 years, there will be no environmental problems. I said, but I think the problem is the scientific perception of science and also technological, or perception of technology, as I read Heidegger. He just wrote in 50s about the question of technology. He says our perception of science as technology, in fact, our modern worldview is the problem, is problematic. Then I just convinced them. When I finished my dissertation in 1960, and after 2 years, I got an invitation from Mary Tucker, Evelyn Tucker. I didn't know her. So one reason I am here is because of her. Because my university said we couldn't cover your expenses. So we don't have a budget for overseas conference. Plus, it is on ecology and religion. It's not important, event. But when I told them, write them an email, and John Green, I said, unfortunately, I couldn't come, but I can send my paper to be read there. They said, no, we like your paper. We will cover your all expenses. Also, we will host you here for 1 month. And this event, this paper presentation, and being here for a month changed my life, academic life at least. Because after that, I know these good people. Then we went with Mary Tucker, Evelyn to Indonesia in 2005 for a summer school. And this is why now Indonesia is more it is environmental awareness in Indonesia is the #1 in the Muslim countries. Even the Majlisul Ulama, they issued a fatwa about the environmental protection. This is very important, and they become a role model for the rest of the Muslim world. And then I was invited to South Africa to a winter school. For 1 month I was there. No, after 15 years later, when I visited South Africa, I saw on my panel a young lady, and she said, did you remember me? I said, no, I am getting older. Mm-hmm. She said, I was your student at the winter school, and the first time I just connected Islam with ecology. Now I have a PhD in environmental studies. I said, this is my Nobel Prize. Then I was invited to many events and conferences. I try to especially wake up my Muslim fellows. We have to care about climate change, because by the climate change is most affecting the underdeveloped countries, poor countries. So there is a lack of knowledge, lack of resources, lack of tools. So we have to help them. We have to educate them. We have to provide, how they can find a solution. Otherwise, a few months ago, there was they interviewed me for a project funded by the EU, European Union. They said, what do you think about climate refugees? I said, at least first we have to understand the climate crisis, the implication of climate crisis, and also help these people in their homeland. We care for you, and we educate them, train them, and teach them some basic skills to survive in this, tough situation. Then we can, otherwise just building, new walls after the collapse of Berlin walls. Now every nation is building her own walls. To just you cannot protect this, because it is accepted by the UN as a climate crisis, accepted as a human right. It says, if you're a victim of climate a disaster, it is a right for you to move to another safe place for you, for your family, and for the future. And so, as you said, our final document was Al Mizan, a covenant for the earth. As you said, many people ask us as a Muslim environmentalist why there are a document by Pope Laudato Si encyclical, and it was a big event in the world. It was to give us a hope about how the religious communities also care about the environment, about climate change. Then we Muslim environmentalists, we just established a core team. Then we produced this document in consultation with all Muslim environmentalists around the world, and Said Hussein Nasr was one of them. And Alhamdulillah, it was launched by UNEP in this February. Now it is on the website. You can download it. Now it is translated to 3 or 4 languages, but in the future it will be available for all languages. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Afreen, you serve on the IPCC. You work on the science of climate. What brings you to a conversation on faith?
That's a great question. And I can, I guess, try to squeeze this into a few minutes, because frankly, it's a long journey that really honestly brings me here at this moment and in this gathering. So short answer, the topic was super interesting, faith and climate change, something I have not spent my days and nights thinking about. But then it also opened up that possibility for recognizing that something that I had long been interested in and building towards might just be that. So I'll quickly share my background is in mechanical engineering and in aerospace systems. All of my education was in engineering, working with technology, but it was only when I started practicing as an engineer when I started to see the limits of technology. Many engineers, at their core want to make the world a better place, honestly. But when you start engaging with it, you realize that that process of making is getting harder, because the world is changing and changing faster than what your technologies and what your design decisions, what your safety factors might be. So when we talk about climate change, is ultimately the impacts that a lot of the infrastructure will feel. Well, how did that infrastructure got built? According to certain design specifications. What specifications should we choose? Well, we don't know anymore because now the temperature is getting different. The precipitation patterns are changing. Many real things that engineers are grappling with in their daily work. So fast forward, I had begun to realize that there are these complex interactions that you really have to begin to understand between people, the environment, and the technical system. And until we really start doing that, we're not going to, quote unquote, make the world a better place. So that got me interested in engineering systems, got me interested in environmental policy, really sort of begin to understand that, perhaps it's not just technology innovation, but the rules that we are putting in place that are going to matter. So I've studied, systems theory quite a bit. I come from a systems engineering background. And one of the key things that systems theory holds is that there are these leverage points, places where you can intervene to create big changes. And policy or rules are such places. So that really got me interested in policy, spent time at the Kennedy School. So I don't see myself as a traditional engineer, but as a reformed engineer, really thinking about not just technology, but also policy. And then over time, recognizing that where does policy come from, both individuals as well as at the community level. And that really connects with values. So for several years now, I've been actually thinking about how does value-based design happen in engineering? What is value-centric design? Many people have written about it. In fact, even in my day job, we use value maximization for a spacecraft or for a space mission. How do we design the space mission which will give us maximum scientific value? This is a question we ask, a project that I've done at NASA. So the idea of value is actually not completely divorced when it comes to engineering. But how value is understood has been very limited. But now this opens up this possibility of recognizing that really we should be thinking about values that people hold dear personally. That is faith.
No, thank you all of you, especially for this point about values, because in policy we talk about values all the time, but we then turn all of them into an economic value. And therefore all policy must be to manage the economic value. But if you assume, as I think the room we've been in all day has mostly assumed that values is more than economic value, then the policy question becomes how do you influence people's assertion of that value without going into too much. My own journey is my first 3 degrees were in the science. I'm also reformed and I'm seeking help. But sort of, I started working on climate essentially as a science problem on the belief that science is going to explain what the problem is and people are rational, they will change, right? Because the only point of policy is to change behavior, right? I will make some policy, that policy will change your behavior to the direction that I want. And if I tell you what science is telling you, obviously as a rational person, you will change. Now, if that happened, I would not look like this, because irrationally, I like that 3rd cup of ice cream as much as the 2nd. And therefore, I am not entirely rational. And then policy came to this idea that no, the motor must be economic, right? If you can put an economic value on things, people, because they are greedy, they're not just rational. They're not completely rational, but they're rational. But they're also greedy. So if you give them an incentive, they will do more of that. If you give them a stick, they will do less of that. Give me a tax break, I'll buy a Tesla. Slap a ticket on me and I will sort of build properly. That is all what economics is, and it's correct because people are greedy. But what we found is people are greedy, but they're not entirely greedy. They don't always buy the Tesla. Right? They say hello to someone they don't know, even though that is of no value economically. They help someone they don't need to help. And that brings me to this idea that it is not science versus morality or economics versus morality, that there must be some other motor to behavior. And it seems to me as a climate person that one of those motors must be the moral values that people hold. If 85% of the people say, even if they are lying, that their values come partly from religion, then we should at least give it a shot. I expect it to work no better than science has, but science hasn't solved the problem, right? Which is not that it hasn't, but it hasn't completely. We know the science. Economics completely hasn't. I don't assume that faith completely will, but to me the question, and I want to come back to you with this question, is that does faith, and to me that's a question, does faith, written whatever way you want, religion or otherwise, I think Greta is a faith act. Greta's argument on climate is essentially a moral argument. She's saying, I know this, don't tell me what the science says. I think this is just wrong to do it this way. Right? And if you strip it down, it is a moral question. It is a totally secular morality, but it's a moral question that she's putting, at least to me. So my question to you, and maybe Mary Evelyn, I'll start with you on what you've seen, the difference in these 30 years. Does faith have a role in leveraging the behavior of people? Because it is one thing to say, my faith is green, my God is greener than yours. Right? And a lot of the literature is like that. But I don't always see it in the behavior of people who profess a particular faith. That is certainly true for my own. I think it is true for many others. So how do we get from proclaiming that faith says these things about ecology to people of faith actually behaving different?
Well, it's such an important question, right? And I mean, we've tried to approach this in a variety of ways. One is, you know, are we going to be moved by horror or wonder, right? The idea of the numinous, that's which is terrifying or that which is beautiful. And I just want to raise up the floods in Pakistan, which the Secretary General at the time described as the worst disasters he had ever seen, 2010, $43 billion of damage, 2,000 people dying, millions of people losing their land, et cetera. So we are getting this incredible amount of bad news. Is it going to be able to change people? Not fully. And I think we need to have, as well, something of a reinvention of the human, is what Thomas Berry used to say, at the species level, which means that we have to reconnect to these systems in a way that actually will change our behavior. And in fact, so I could give you an answer too. You know, we've worked in seminaries. You have to have education. Becky understands this very well, and so on. So how are we going to educate people and have reliable, trusted spokesperson? That's absolutely essential. But let me just offer this into the mix. And it moves it actually a little bit out of the religions, but it was also connected. Before we went to China this summer, we asked 2 graduate students to do a research project on differentiated sentience in the world and ecological spirituality. They came up with 145 annotated, science-based, some of them, not all, evidences. I mean, this differentiated sentience in trees and plants and roots and in birds and migration and so on, it's exploding. It is absolutely exploding. NYU did a whole conference on this in the spring with all scientists talking about this differentiated sentience. We're not the only sentient beings. At the end of it, they had a call to action.
And with AI, we are creating another differentiated sentience.
Well, this is true.
All a case
this
of its
is
own.
true.
Yeah.
This is true.
Please.
No, but the point here is this gives a sense of hope of our deep connections, that we need that restoration of we are humans in a living earth community. And religions can give that as well, but we need to bring in what is, especially for the next generation, very empowering, very hopeful in terms of a change of action. Because if we say this is a communion of subjects, which was Barry's favorite word, that everything is interconnected, ecosystems and so on, why would we destroy them? You know, so I think in addition to religions, al-Mizan, and so on, we have to draw on what is happening in our world today for a sensibility that, and of course, indigenous traditions are coming roaring back into that space, but not alone.
I love the element of hope, but Ibrahim, can I, hopefully as a friend, but also as a fellow Muslim, I'm going to ask the tough question that others may think impolite, but you and I can talk about it. I also go back to the flood. I'm from Pakistan. And I was in Pakistan when the flood started, and one of the immediate reaction was the news was full of how people are praying for the rains to stop. Right? The flood comes, you don't look for the IPCC report. The first thing you do is your house has just been destroyed, your cattle is gone, your child is dead, and you look up to God and say, why the hell was it me? Right? So for good or bad, people look to their belief system. But the tough question to ask you is this. If we find all these evidence in Mizan and elsewhere that our particular religion, in this case Islam, but this is true in your 10 volumes, is green, then why do we not see that green in the behavior even of people who profess to be very religious? Right? Who take pride in saying my religion is green. Why do I not see that in the behavior? Whether it is with water or so on and so forth.
This is $1 million question. It asked me at Morocco, at Marrakesh, by a Buddhist environmentalist and also anthropologist who said to me, I traveled from Morocco to Pakistan on foot to just see and the land and also meet the people. But I am disappointed when I saw Muslims, they don't care about environment. They don't care about the water they are using. They don't care about the underground water. And when I said, you don't have a water management system. You are, overusing the water system. They said, no, God is great. But I reminded them in the Quran, God reminds you, I created everything with al-mizan, with a balance.
Mizan means balance.
Yeah, it means balance. But you don't care about this balance. I said, unfortunately, me and also our Muslim environmentalists, we couldn't. This is our big question to convince our people. For this, I just understand the role of worldviews is not only give us a lens to see the world differently. Just look at out of the window, see a different world. The worldviews, they also shape our lives. When I look at the early verses of the Quran was not asking people to pray 5 times a day and to fast or to rituals. All this come after 10 years. The Quran first changed Arabs' perception of reality. He taught them everything is created in the world is created by purpose, with a balance, with a purpose, with a meaning. There is nothing, without a purpose. So you have to care about that. Then I look at the development of Islamic civilization, but there was a environment-friendly life in the classical times. As far as in 19th century, I read many of travelers' book of Westerners. They traveled, it was custom, in the colonization time to go to the West, East, to discover the East. And all of them, Alfonso, even, Edward Lane, the famous British lexicographer and traveler who spent, almost 15 years in Cairo, their observation is very good. Then I say, what happened to the Muslim society? I think one thing is the impact of colonization, because they're just the birth of nation state. Their perception of themselves and the perception of nature is changed. Their worldview is changed. Although they are practicing Muslims, they don't have a connection with the nature, with the universe. The nature just doesn't mean anything to them. The pollution of the river. In Turkey, and I say, there are 5 rivers you cannot even take. You can't drink the water, and you can also make wudu.
But what is the role of religion? And what is the role of leaders of religion? In this?
They are not aware of the environmental and climate problems, because we saw this during our consultation for El Mizan. They said, "What is this? We just there's not. We have to develop. We have to compete with the West. We have to also exploit nature. We are disappointed. Some very respected religious scholars, we found out that they are not aware of the environmental problems as summarized by Mary Evelyn. So the ignorance of the problem, and the second thing, they expect everything from the nation state. If there is something wrong, or leaders, they will fix it. Therefore, there is no strong NGOs at the grassroots. If there is some NGOs, for example, we went to Iran, we meet them, some of them secretly. We saw they care about environment, but they can easily be blamed to be supported by foreign governments.
So when there's a problem, the government will fix it. Otherwise,
yes,
not.
Yes, and the religious, yes.
Where is my agency?
Yeah, the religious leadership, unfortunately, is not aware of the environment, the environmental problems.
Afreen, same thing to continue with you, and I should note, I've mentioned Islam because that's one of the things we are focusing on, and both Ibrahim and I come from that tradition. But if I look at the world, it's not just Islam. I don't see this in any religion. When I read the literature on what religions say about the environment, it seems much greener than what I see in the practice of people. Right?
Yeah.
And to me, the fundamental question is, can doctrine influence practice, behavior, right? Not an easy question, but hey, we have 2 days.
You know, if I can just summarize it, perhaps we have a downscaling problem, right? So, you know, environmental scientists will create these projections, you know, plus average 2 degrees, you know, temperature, global rise in temperature, or, you know, what the water cycle would look like. But the policymaker on the ground or the farmer on the ground wants to understand, what does that mean for me, for my plot of land, for my town, right? So you have all these global models that long, you know, people have made, scientists have made, NASA has made, you know, makes these Earth observations. But now there's recognition, you have to get finer and finer resolution to really matter. I think that's also the question about faith, right? So people know the big tenets of their faith. This is my hypothesis, which one could test with a research question. People know the tenets of their faith. Don't harm others. Don't cause corruption on the land. Don't be, you know, excessive and greedy. So in most, you know, people of faith, you'll know these tenets. But how do you downscale these tenets into personal behavior and action? Perhaps is not obvious to people or not part of their daily consciousness. Even if it might be obvious if they're asked to think about it, it is not part of their daily consciousness, which then might partly explain why they behave the way they behave. So the question is, one question would be, how does one translate or downscale the overarching tenets, which perhaps are very common in many faiths around the world of, you know, being a good person, not harming other people, so on and so forth, translating it down into what it means for effects on the environment, climate change, and therefore how behavior should change. This to me, you know, is sort of a question that I've had in mind, which connects with the paradox that you had raised, that, you know, you see people behaving very differently in a very sort of, you know, wasteful way about the environment, yet they profess to be, you know, good adherents to one faith or the other, but clearly those faiths have clear injunctions about how to behave. So to me, it's perhaps a translation and a downscaling problem.
I'm going to ask Mary Evelyn what the answer to your question is, and while you think about it, for people in the room, there's a very famous part of Muslim doctrine, if you will, a hadith about sort of if you are at the brink of a river. So tell me if I'm wrong. If you're at the banks of a brimming river and there waste a drop of water, you shall be answerable for it at the day of judgment. Right? Religion growing up in the desert, that makes full sense. And you will have people tell you that story even as they are wasting water as they tell you that story. Right? Now, again, this is not about Islam. You see this everywhere. We take certain parts with great pride of our tradition, but they translate less into action, whereas others do. So to me, the positive question is, how can you use this doctrine? One of the most beautiful ones, and this may be the ones you were thinking, for me is the hadith about if at the moment of the end of
the hour is upon you,
hour of judgment, and
yes,
you are
the end of days is upon you, and you have a sapling in your hand.
If you are planting a tree, keep planting.
Yes.
Right? Now that is just mind-blowingly spectacular to me. That's a Greta statement. Right? The moment of the end of everything is on you. You are planting a tree. What do? Keep planting. Right? So to me, that is full of meaning. The question to me is not that it is full of meaning. The question is
a message about care about
yeah,
future.
but why doesn't that message translate into action? So on Afreen's question, from your 30 years of looking at this, why hasn't it translated as much as it might have? Is it because we as scholars have not been able to help downscale? Is it, as Ibrahim suggested, that religious leaders have not bought into this narrative that we have had amongst us? Is it that people's own interests come in the way and this just isn't the priority? Or is it something else?
Well, it's all of the above. It's also an economic system that insists that growth and economic progress is the only way to go, which has completely undermined environmentalism. And even from the Rio conference, environment and development has been in conflict until fairly recently. So we have an economic system that people say we won't give up. We'll destroy the planet before we give up capitalism in its present form, even though we've tried to reform it, donut economics, and so on and so forth. So that's a huge driving force. I completely agree with Ibrahim that religious leaders are not well educated, which is why we need to build in education and so on, and we need to build in principles and practicality. On our website, we have all kinds of projects called engaged projects on the ground, tree planting, water cleanup, and so on and so forth. So a lot of groups are doing this. But I still think if we take United Nations, for example, has not really allowed religions into the conversation until there's sort of NGOs over there. But in the last few years, the last COP in Dubai was the first time a faith pavilion was allowed into the setting.
It was actually the most spectacular pavilion at the last COP. I was interviewed there, and whatever, of all the pavilions, the most fun-looking one was the faith pavilion.
But let me just say that that was also driven in part, there was a conference in Abu Dhabi before that we went to that the Muslim Council of Elders held. Okay. It's based in Abu Dhabi, but they started this, as you know, at the Al-Aqsa in Cairo, with this sense we need to build in the Muslim world a sense of peace, of tolerance, of understanding. The Pope came to help form this, and this Muslim Council drew people from all over the world to prepare for the COP conference. I think this is very, very positive, but what I'm saying, it's taken that long for something. In our School of the Environment, the oldest school in the country, in the US, at Yale, it is only very recently that even the human dimension of the environment is part of the discussion. It was all science and policy and economics are going to solve these things. Even hiring minorities was like 2 or 3 years ago. So we have a long, long way to go in this effort. But once the doors open, I think it's going to be incontrovertible. I mean, these conferences in Iran.
Has the door opened?
The door opened to, I think it's opening now. I mean,
no, is it opening, you think?
Oh, yes. UNEP, with our mutual friend, Iyad Abu-Moghli, to have a Faith for Earth within UNEP, that was unheard of. We worked in the New York office for years, but there's an opening now. That's what I would say.
Just, she reminded me, Iyad met the Prince Hassan of Jordan and made a presentation to him. Now, the Jordan is supporting Al Mizan as a project. Now, they have a big symposium in Jordan today, and tomorrow, hope we can implement Al Mizan to the grassroots. This is very good news. And the Council of Elder People in Abu Dhabi, they changed their mind because they sent them Al Mizan.
Yes.
After reading Al Mizan, they changed their mind, and they give their full support.
I want to open it up, and I hope you will also not leave this question of how do you leverage actual behavior change, or can you leverage? I think that should be an honest question. Can you use faith to leverage behavior change in the 85% of the world who claim that they get their moral values from religion? And I actually don't even want them all to do it. If 2% of the 85% do it, right? That's huge itself. Anyhow, questions, comments. I will give first priority to those who are not at the conference, but I'll come to others too.
So two things. So I was messaging my father. He's
tell us who you are and.
Sure.
Yeah.
Dan Carmen at the BU School of Theology, and my scholarship is in sacramental eschatology, so our sort of apocalyptic end times thinking.
You lost the engineer in me
right.
4 times there, but go ahead.
with 4 different words, no. So two quick things. One, so I was messaging my father at the American Bankruptcy Institute just now to yeah, is there anything you're seeing over there? And he's like, well, yeah, so solar energy, way too expensive. Businesses are going down, the NIMBYism of wind farms, right? Then, of course, you have, in terms of insurance, yeah, and with California, you can kiss your farm goodbye with wildfires. There's no way they're going to cover you, let alone flood insurance in Florida or New Orleans, right? So the thing that I'm wondering as a way to sort of shift our thinking then is this sort of, how can we help people that are experiencing loss, that we're seeing them in our congregations, no matter the religion, that they're coming to us with the sort of like, why has God done this to us? This sort of idea of theodicy. So I would say in Christianity, of course, we have the idea that a way we might be able to move forward in this might be of a sort of renewal in sacramentality, right? Like in the taking of Eucharist, for example, in becoming that body, there is an ethical element that does follow that, and that's sort of the work of Louis Marie Chauvet that would sort of describe that. So just as we think of our sort of ritual studies and the way that, you know, if we're shoulder to shoulder in the mosque, like, why are we praying in the way that we're praying? Why are we submitting to the Lord? It's because we do believe in this ethical way of moving forward.
So thank you. I go ahead, but I wanted to take a few and then come back. Is that okay? But I do want to highlight that rituals matter. Who else had their hand up?
I just want to actually flip the question a little bit. You're asking whether we can have and inspire that change with faith as a lever. I want to ask you whether it is possible to have the kind of change at a scale that we need at the global level and the kind of fundamental change that we need in behavior without an element of faith to it. And I'm referring to, you refer to Greta as a faith actor, and
certainly a moral actor.
As a moral actor. So in a sense, talking about faith in that sense, which means something that is driven from a moral foundation, from a belief in something that is not necessarily rational. It could be Gaia, it could be, it could be any number of things, but the kind of change that is needed, is that even possible without that sort of faith level?
I want to pick up on a couple of things that were said now or this morning and then go somewhere else. So
all in 1 minute, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So Afreen mentioned downscaling, and this morning we were talking of narratives. I will argue that even in my, let's forget faith as it was just said, in my circle of friends and acquaintances, highly educated, I do not believe that a lot of people still understand what climate change is and why, and then what action they can take. At the same time that we are now getting confusing messages from quote unquote experts saying, hey, it's not an individual thing, it's a policy thing. And that's what a lot of people think, that, okay, someone else is gonna fix it.
I really like that comment that was just made. Reinhold Niebuhr talked about we're not actually going to make change without the ultra-rational hope that change was possible. And he called that a religious hope. Whatever religion you're talking about, you need an ultra-rational hope that the impossible will happen. And on the point of, can doctrine change? Doctrine can change some people. I think most people here who are asking these questions root it in their understanding of their faith. But it's a really, really small number. And so I think the more interesting question is, what role, how does doctrine interact with other things? Because what practices are there that change the way I interpret that hadith? What experiences are there that change the way I understand my responsibilities according to this religion? Because I think that it's through experiences and relationships that we're finding the big shifts, which we then reinterpret through our doctrine. And it's just really fascinating.
This is wonderful. I'll come back to the panel, pick on any of them. Please don't pick all of them, but just to summarize, rituals matter. right? And they do, right? What people eat, what they wear, what they don't eat. And these are very consequential policy things. And these are not rituals, but there's a whole world of rituals, and I'm just picking one part of what you said. The other, is change possible without faith? Which Fawad points, I love the point that Imran was making, that is it that the problem is actually not people's understanding of faith, it's their understanding of ecology. It's that we scientists haven't done a good job of explaining why climate is important, that's why they're not looking at it. And maybe we are just going the wrong direction looking at faith. Just explain climate better and then will happen. That, again, I'm paraphrasing purposely for effect. And finally, this idea of ultra-rational hope, that the purpose of religion partly becomes, Niebuhr seems to be saying, is that what you should search for, the cultivation of this ultra-rational hope that the impossible can happen, any or all of any of the above, anyone.
Could I just start here, because you're sort of talking about the Christian tradition when you mentioned sacramentality. And so this is, I mean, one of Thomas Berry's book from Columbia is called The Sacred Universe. And it's true that the Catholic tradition in particular, but not exclusively, has a very strong sense of the sacramentality of the whole earth. And that's what we ritualize. We, meaning Christians and a lot of other people. And without that basis, I mean, if you take incarnation, that something came into the world, why would you destroy the incarnational reality? In the beginning was the Logos in John's Gospel. Everything has inner ordering principles. So I think we've got lots of resources there to say there's a sacredness here that needs to be ritualized, and through ritual we can do rituals of mourning sadness and mourning beginning again, which there's so much to be said about that. I will resist. I think there's no question that we can't make these big changes without some kind of faith, and I love Becky's point about the radical hope. So I'll leave it at that for others.
Right.
You know, I before coming here, I used to teach for 2 years in Finland, one of the highly secular cultures, and also very environmentally sensitive society. I try to understand them. Then I discovered that RNS deep ecology movement has a big changed their mentality about what is nature, because they, without any sacred word, they just say nature is our mother. Who are you? They don't say, when their perception of self is changed. They don't say I am Ibrahim, I am a part of nature. Mm-hmm. I am the child of the nature. Therefore, I have to care for my mother. This changed this perception. But here, Mujib and also other friends remember, Rumi used this metaphor in his poetry. But nowadays, no Muslims just understands Rumi in this sense. Mother is our nature. We have to care. We have to be nice to our mother. But again, in the travelers' books, I just found out they are amazed by Ottoman times Muslim women, how they donated money for the protection of animals, especially migratory animals. Because when they are sick, when their leg is broken, when their wind is broken, they couldn't migrate. So they just established waqfs, foundations for their protection. But nowadays, look at in the modern Turkey in 21st century, the street dogs are a big problem, and they just passed a new law in the parliament to just get rid of them. And just, a German professor at environmentalist asked me, why you are not writing something against this? I said, they will not listen to me. Because there's this elected people, we know everything, we don't need your expertise, we just get rid of them. And some of Muslim scholars, they say, we don't care, we are just, they are dangerous for us. First things I said, why we have a street dogs problem, that's why first there is this problem, because we don't care about these animals. We don't care about them. Then it becomes a problem, though no, they cannot solve it. And we say, at least, we can find some solutions. But what is your solution? I said, I can't just, summarize my solution in few words. for a problems, in the making for 40 years, for 50 years. So I said, in a holistic way, we have to talk with the scientists, with the psychologists, with the sociologists, all people. Then how we can find a solution? Because there's a psychological dimension, there's a sociological dimension, a religious dimension. So, okay.
Afreen? And whatever you say, if you can also say something about Imran's question, who's saying that it's not really faith leaders who didn't succeed, it's these science folks.
Yes, I mean, I'll quickly touch upon both Imran's question, also, the other question on can we, Fawaz's question that, can we even think about the climate action problem without including faith in the mix? I think that's a very valid question. Perhaps some clues can be found just looking at previous history, perhaps some of which Mary was alluding to, that so far faith has been put out of the picture. That doesn't prove that faith, excluding faith would necessarily lead to no solutions, but still perhaps provides us some data. And I think one quick comment I'll make is that economists tell us that this is a collective action problem. Climate change is essentially a collective action problem, meaning that a lot of people have to come together to act on it. It's not just one person, choosing to make good choices and everybody else, continues to pollute. So critical mass has to come together, which then by definition means you're talking about very large groups of people, which then by definition means we have to understand how a large fraction of human beings are operating and how their behavior is driven by, and is faith is part of that equation. That's an open question, but I think a very important one, because we are talking about lots of people coming together. And just to quickly answer, Imran's question, I think that's a fair point, that the downscaling, so to speak, if I can use that term again, it's very common in the sciences and engineering, has not happened effectively. This is something even NASA tries to do, even for the scientists themselves. There's a new whole program called, Earth Action, where they recognize that it's not just enough to make nice pictures of the Earth, which I absolutely love that NASA satellites generate, but we have to not just data and models and assume that people will simply understand and use them. We have to bring it down to decision-making tools at the local municipality levels and even below, so that individual homeowners or organizations or cities can understand what it means for them. And we have to make those tools and that translation available. Even in science, we're still trying to figure it out. I think in the religious community, that question is open, that we're doing that effectively.
I think we have time for one more round, 1 and 2 and 3.
So this whole question of faith leaders, science, and behavior, there are examples, but we tend to forget those examples. In the second half of the 20th century, polio was a very big problem. It was as big a problem as you think climate is today. And at the turn of the century, there were only 4 countries in the world that had wild-type polio circulation: Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, and Nigeria. These were the pain countries, 4 countries. In India and in Nigeria, mainly the virus was circulating in Muslim majority districts. So at that point, Muslim families were not vaccinating their children. The tools were available. They were not vaccinating their children, thinking that there was this rumor. There was no WhatsApp, but there was still rumor.
Conspiracy theories.
That this vaccine is going to sterilize your kids. So they were hiding their kids. Doctors, scientists worked on religious leaders, local imams in those regions. And when the local imams were convinced, polio was wiped out from India in 2011. Soon after that, it was wiped out from Muslim areas of Nigeria. We know the fiasco in Pakistan with CIA getting involved in the vaccination program. And Afghanistan, of course, is on a different planet. So we know that leaders, religious leaders and science have worked together.
Yeah.
There are examples.
Yeah, there's also the example of population in Indonesia, right? When the Ministry of Population became the Ministry of Religious Affairs, you find different references in the same Quran.
So thank you very much to our rocket scientist. So let me build on what Afreen was saying. So I know her for quite some time. I think she made some very, interesting and very precise question. This is a collective action problem, number one. Number two is that is downscaling possible? What I would argue that, so now I go back to Nasser. Nasser, when he was an undergraduate student at MIT, so it's an anecdote, he went to listen to a talk by Barton Russell. And that day he decided that this is not a path. He decided to quit MIT. That is, basically science is not going to solve the question. Hussain Nasser. He was an MIT undergraduate, so he basically went to listen to Barton Russell, and then he decided that he's going to quit. Because this is not, science is not going to answer the question he's raising. His parents were here, his father already died, and his mother was in Arlington. She said, no, you have to finish your degree. You are from Iran, you cannot just quit. So he finished, then he went to the other school on the red line. So in that one, basically, not
it is on the
other one. So the other one, he studied environmental studies for his MS, was not very happy. Then he did his PhD on philosophy of science. So that has transformed him really to understand really what is the relationship between nature and science. What I am arguing here is that with Afreen, this downscaling is not possible, he understood at that time. The downscaling from faith to action is not possible because there is no observational causal connection. What I would argue for us really, since our mind is already very clouded with this causal connection does not exist with faith. So that means it has to be something else. What is that else, I think, is the challenge. The question then becomes what I was arguing, that knowledge, when it does not provide certainty, that is science, then what we need is a consensus of the community. When Adil is arguing that how can I motivate people, you cannot come up with generalizable theory. What you could do though, you can go to a particular community and then convince them, if you do this, then you have an actionable outcome that is better than yesterday. So I'll conclude by Amartya Sen. He has a book called The Idea of Justice. The first sentence is that there is nothing called justice. Are we more just than yesterday based on certain metric? So what is that metric that I want really, that faith to do so that I can do something actionable that leads to some kind of climate outcome? So our challenge should be that really. What is that really? If we can figure that out, that's a good research question.
Ellen Messer, I'm an anthropologist here at BU. So I thank you very much for your various perspectives. So I wanted to ask Mary Evelyn Tucker how she thinks certain kinds of institutions might be valuable places for scientists and faith leaders to come together. Because I did look you up, and I see that you spoke in 1996 and in 2006 at the Institute for Religion and Age of Science. That's one of the few contexts that actually brings scientists and faith leaders together. It may not have been as successful as I wanted it to be, but it is international. So I just wondered, this was a question, what kinds of contexts actually bring people together for meaningful discussions year after year, and so they bring it back to their communities, both the faith communities and the science communities. I asked that question also because here in the early 2000s, there was a mass working group of faith-based organizations working together on religion and environment. And we had really productive meetings. They were mostly Christians and Jews, but they're very productive meetings. Eventually, we brought in some of the environmental organizations, and we had a very successful event, and then it was over. So one of the things is how to create more continuity in these kinds of settings, these institutional settings, because I found it really distressing that it didn't continue because it was a very productive setting. And I also want to point out that from the perspective of the environmental organizations, they saw the faith communities as a new set of constituencies. From the faith-based perspective, where they were having problems keeping congregations, growing and keeping congregations, they thought the environment issues would be a way to bring in more people to their faith institutions. And my third sort of institutional context would be the work. I'm very happy that you brought up the issue of the human right to a clean environment, a clean and sustainable environment. And are those conversations places where faith and science can really come together? Have they been underutilized and developed? Thank you.
My name is Fatih Çalışay. I am from Turkey, currently affiliated with Harvard University Center for Middle Eastern Studies. My simple question is that we are talking about the crisis of climate. why we are not talking about the crisis of faith altogether. Because we are thinking that our faith...
You want to make our life even more difficult.
Our faith gonna save the world, but how the current global crisis gonna save our faith?
Super question. I'm just going to concentrate on these last two, but I want to speak to the anthropologist. So there is an Institute for Religion and Age of Science. They have summer meetings. They're very good, largely UU oriented, very open to science and so on, up on Star Island off the coast of New Hampshire. But we've also spoken at the Ecological Society of America. The college is 10,000 people. For many years, we went there and spoke. They're very, very keen on this. We've spoken at the Geological Society of America and the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the AAAS, we did a whole conference with them on evolution at the Chicago Field Museum. The Geological Society's been interested because we've done a film on Journey of the Universe, which was on PBS. The book is published by the Yale Science Division, Journey of the Universe. We have conversations on how this matters for scientists and for people in the environmental field. It's on Amazon. You know, it's been rather successful for this conjunction of an evolutionary point of view. We worked on it for 10 years with scientists and so on, but with a sense that there is meaning here, that this is not a meaningless and random universe. So there are things that can be done, and I do think media needs to help. Your question, I think, is really terrific because, and this is why we're also exploring this Living Earth community and creating a new website on it, because the crisis of faith, especially for next generations, is massive. And we know the mainstream churches in this country are just falling apart. They can't consider the environment because they can't support the buildings and the community. But our feeling has always been, if people get this profound sense of interdependence and interconnection and so on, and the enormous science that's giving us this in migrations, the patterns, et cetera, that there'll be a revival of a broader spiritual sensibility. I prefer to call it, spiritual sensibility, even rather than faith. So your question is right on target. We've got to find the openings, I think. So I'll leave it
Ibrahim,
at that.
any brief comment
Just,
on any of these?
Shafiq, you are first very important point, but as Mary and John will remember, Mikhail Gorbachev, the last president of USSR, invited us as president of Green Cross, right,
Yes.
movement, International Green Cross, to Lyon to a meeting in 2002. The name was "Is Ethics the Missing Link?"
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And he said in his opening speech, I still remember very well, if as a former atheist and also president of a communist state, we can solve all our problems with technology, more science, more technology, we will not invite you. Because they invited more than 400 environmentalists, also some religious leaders. They said, please help us, hope we can, 22 years ago, hope we can respond to this challenge, hope we can benefit from the religious, resources. But for this, we also have to first, educate religious leaders. There are some very educated religious leaders about environment, about climate change. But still, it's a big problem. Let me make, as an appreciation, as a thank, because the thanking is a part of Islam. The Quran starts with Alhamdulillah. The best website, one of the best websites for Islam and environment as a resource is the Yale University Forum on Religion website. You see, it is founded by Mary Evelyn and John Green and their vision. You can find all verses regarded about nature, all hadith and all resources on, and also very extensive bibliography. If we have more than 200 universities in Turkey, nobody cares about that. So it is not only religious leadership, also our academia is, it is very, very politicized. They are not addressing the real life problems. They are just living in the ivory towers of the campus.
On that happy note,
I'll just sort of conclude with perhaps things that we already talked about and connect back with also Dr. Shafiq's comment that the issue of how do we scale the question of scaling decisions. Ultimately, when we're talking about human behavior, to some degree that is what we're talking about, right? That individuals making choices and so forth. And I think that is perhaps a central question to ask. Can we actually do it? Can we rigorously prove it? Can we show it? Open question, perhaps very difficult to do so. But I think it will remain a core question to ask, that if we are to inquire in this line of inquiry of faith and climate change, faith being a very personal and individually held notion, we will have to begin to grapple with this.
I have one question I want to ask before we end, but just so that everyone doesn't disappear, I'll put these two sheets here afterwards if anyone wants to pick them up from our partner center, the Oxford Center for Islamic Studies. One of them is they are doing a survey on climate and faith. And there is a link and a QR code here. We would really appreciate if you can take a photograph and fill that. Trying to understand attitudes and why people behave the way they do. And the other is they're in the process of advertising some fellowships there. And there is information on that, particularly for graduate students and others who may be interested in these questions. I'll leave them here after the talk if anyone wants to pick them up. But before we end, imagine that Jeremy from CURA, the Institute of Religion and World Affairs, and John from the Pardee Center for the Longer Term Future, who bring you back here in 5 years. And we put you up on these seats again. And what do you think is the one thing that you would have liked to have changed in how we talk about faith and climate in that period?
Yeah.
So what is your wish list? What is the one thing that you wish to change and how? Very briefly, one sentence, one word.
Well, it's this question of how scientists and religious peoples, you see, I like to say peoples because leaders are one thing, and as we know, the women are huge in these world's religions, and they're most often not religious leaders. So I think we've got to talk about religious communities, not only leaders, but I think we need to create strategic, high level and low level or grassroots discussions with key and sympathetic scientists on this issue that will generate and catalyze change. I want to give one example and then I'll stop. One of the most effective religion and ecology projects in the world is called the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, started by the Norwegian government. The forum was involved from the very beginning. The king of Norway was there. They love their forests, but they said in 10 years we've given $4 billion to forest preservation. Nothing has happened significantly. It's not nothing. But they said without the religious, spiritual sensibilities and knowledge of the guardians of the forest, indigenous peoples, along with in Brazil, the Christians, in Indonesia, the Muslims, and so on, we will not make progress. They are bringing together communities. It's extraordinary, but they're also having scientific leaders do some of the teaching along with indigenous leaders. They are politically engaged. It is absolutely remarkable in the Amazon, in Indonesia, and in the Congo. So this is what I think we need to build on. It's a 7-year project.
Ibrahim, one thing you wish would change?
You know, as will be broadcasted through the social media and YouTube, I will prefer to see one of young people, young students, MA students, PhD students, join us in the panel.
Yeah.
Or share with us their what they have done. Because, you know, as I said, you know, just if I was not here, for example, attended Harvard conference, maybe many things would be different. You see, so just changing one mind is, I think, is we will achieve our goal.
So in 5 years, you only want to change one mind,
But-
8 billion others.
But there is a,
Sure,
butterfly effect.
Yes,
It's the butterfly
yes,
effect.
yeah. One thing you would like to see having changed in how we talk about faith and climate?
Our understanding about the connection. I'm a systems engineer, so I love thinking about how things are connected. I would love to understand how is faith connected to climate change. I think we just don't have that understanding yet. In 5 years, I hope we understand it and then can perhaps move forward with that understanding.
Okay. Shahid Jamil, you see the pressure? She's waiting for your paper. I will add my answer to that question. If I had a wish list, what would I want to see changed when we talk about this again in 5 years? I would wish that this framing of the question always as religion versus science is put into the trash bin of bad ideas.
Yep.
Yeah.
I see so many good people just prisoners to the folly of Lynn White.
Yes.
We don't talk about science versus economics, which is also a faith system. Right? I mean, it's a set of ideas and assumptions, but somehow we have trapped ourselves. To me, science does some things, faith does other things. Faith will not demonstrate to me how climate change happens, and I don't think science has much to say how behavior happens. I would like to see a world where we say, this is what faith can do, this is what science can do, and maybe there is something economics can do, but we are not sure. On that happy note, thank you everyone for being here. Please join me in thanking our panel.